Yeah, so the topic today that I'm covering is, we called it mastering social media analytics, best practices and common traps to avoid. Actually, I quite like the talk before, because there's a lot of like parallels also when it comes to numbers and analytics. Let's say you have these low numbers, right? You need to communicate them, and then it's very embarrassing, right? So I also have a couple of points, let's say, touching on transparency and how you can be honest with data and so on. So that's was like a perfect preparation for the talk. So let me dive in. First, a couple of words about me. I'm Alex. I'm one of the co-founders of Quintly. I'm 39 years old. I started the company together with my brother in 2010, 2011. So we are basically doing purely social media analytics for a little bit more than 12 years. And last year, as told already, I Quintly joined the Facelift family, and now we are part basically of this bigger ecosystem, and we are trying to, let's say, create a bigger vision across all-in-one platform and also the social analytics piece. I studied mathematics, so I'm a numbers guy and a product guy. I did a lot of coding in the beginning myself, so I'm pretty deep with all the KPIs and the metrics. And I would just want to share, say, some learnings we got from our customers over the last 12 years, things we see that are repeating from customer to customer, and also like a lot of the things that don't go right. Sometimes you think it's only you, but when we look at this across the whole customer base of us, then you see like these repeating patterns over and over again, and many things that you think that only happen on your side, they happen everywhere, just no one talks about it, right? So these are a lot of things which I'm going to go through. So first touch point, what is social media analytics, right? So the one thing I want to make clear, there's always two areas here, right? There's analytics, which is the profile-based analytics, right? So what we do with Quintly. So basically, it's all around quantitative data around specific social channels that you are adding into products. And then the second piece is a listening piece, which is based on keyword-based searches or search queries that you use to find stuff on the whole web, basically, in mentioning your brand name and other things, right? So what I'm talking about is purely the profile-based analytics, just to make that clear here. And when it comes to the metrics itself, it's also the metrics, they split up usually in two different areas. One is organic and one is paid. And I think Thea mentioned it already in this morning, that with Quintly, we have historically been covering all the organic parts of the paid as well. And now we are basically adding a lot more paid stuff as well. And in general, for the organic side, you would usually have, let's say, metrics on three different levels. It's like on a profile or page level, things like fan numbers, follower numbers, demographics, and so on. You have KPIs on a content level. So for each and every post, things like reach, engagement, video views, etc. And then you have the engagement itself, like comments, likes, shares, like the things that happen one level below. So these are usually the three levels that you have where you could measure KPIs. And then on the paid side, of course, it's a lot more campaign driven, right? So usually you have campaigns, you have ad sets on Meta, or you have ad groups on TikTok, for example. And then you have the ad level data. So you also have these three levels, but it's of course different KPIs that you're looking at, right? More spends, conversions, and things like that. And of course, we always get the question, okay, so what is the perfect dashboard? What's the perfect metric? Which should we use? And the answer is actually, there's really not a one size fits all approach for this, right? So when you select the metrics that are important for your reporting and your analytics, it really depends on your strategy. What's the goal, right? What's the things that are important for your strategy, right? So there's really not one answer, and you always need to approach it in a custom way. So why social media analytics, right? So that's the next question, right? Because we don't want to do analytics and reporting for the sake of reporting, although this happens a lot, I would say, from what I see, but there should always be a reason why we do this, right? And I want to go through a couple of use cases where we have seen that analytics plays a very important role here. So the first one is, I call it here, guide your social media strategy and measure success, right? So the first thing is, you should always have a strategy before you start measuring, right? Of course, the numbers, they can help also with shaping your strategy, but you always need a strategy that you can measure towards, right? If you don't have a goal, if you don't have defined what you want from social media, there's no way in measuring it, because it will not help you to get better, right? So first thing is, have a strategy, and then use metrics and KPIs along that strategy and try to measure success if you're making progress towards your strategy. So that's one very important point where analytics helps. The second one is, as I touched before, right, we have the organic and the paid side. And of course, let's say you are on multiple networks, let's say Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, whatever, right? And you have all the organic data, you have all the paid data. And of course, what you want to do is you want to have dashboards and other things that centralize all this data into one place, right? So that you can, with a click of a button, you can see basically how well you're doing everywhere without a lot of manual processes, right? So it's a lot about centralization of data. Of course, this alone does not help. You need to tie it to the strategy, right? But this is more like taking all the difficulty out of the technical process of getting everything in one place. The next thing is deriving actions and recommendations, right? If you have any data, it don't help you at all. It's meaningless by itself, right? It only becomes important when you can derive certain actions from it, right? For example, what Sarah described before, right? If you see from the data something is not working well, then you can take action from it to avoid it in the future, or try something else, right? And this like trial and error methods I think is like really important to make sure that you can always use the data to do something, right? There shouldn't be data just for the sake of data, but data should be an enabler to do things. The next point where social analytics helps is optimizing content, right? Also what Sarah described before, right? You do a lot of content, some work well, some don't. So you can use it basically to analyze, you can try different things, you can look at past performance, you can look at competitors' post performance, right? And then use this information to optimize your content going forward. What we usually recommend is, let's say you have found like your perfect rules or a formula for good post. We still like recommend that at least with like 20% of your posts, you try other things all the time, right? Because the algorithms change and so on. And if you don't try different things, you cannot measure if what you're doing now is better or worse than what something else could do, right? So although you may have found your formula, we would still recommend you to try other things just to have a benchmark also and see how well is your strategy, and maybe algorithms change and at a certain point you want to try something else or slowly shift your content to a different direction, right? And also the benchmarking part is of course very important there, because you can learn from mistakes of your competitors, so you don't need to make them yourself. The next point is you can get a better understanding of your audience, right? So when you analyze everything, you can understand who are these people that follow you. And one thing, of course, to note is, let's say you have your fans and follower base, right, on social, and you may have things like your target audience or your ideal customer profile. And you have to recognize that these two groups may be different, or they probably are different, right? So that's also something to consider, right? So when you draft your strategy and you decide on your content, you should probably not optimize it for your current follower base, but rather for the ideal follower base that you would like to have, right? And especially from the early days of social media, there's still a lot of, let's say, fans and followers that are not so much attached to your brand, right? Coming from different draws or giveaways and so on. Or of course, there has been a lot of fake follower cleanup and so on, right? So there's still a lot of people that may be following you that are not necessarily your target audience or your customer profile, right? So that's something you want to look out for, that you use analytics to analyze this, but also compare it with what you're looking for and then take the right decisions from there. Then I touched on it before, right? It's the competitive benchmarking. So even if you're not that active on social yet, or you want to do more, right? There's so much data from other players in the market, maybe your competitors, but it could also be any other best practice examples that you know. You can look at the data, of course, anything that's publicly available, but there's a lot. And with certain tools, you can make this very easy, right? So you can look at what works for them, what doesn't work, how fast do they grow? If they grow fast, what did they do, right? So there's a lot of things you can look at. And this will save you a lot of time, right? As I mentioned before, you can avoid their mistakes. You can see if something goes well, you can adopt it for your strategy. And I would not consider this, let's say, blindly copying stuff, because that's kind of would be like a bad attitude. But if you take all the data in and you use it to make your strategy better, I think it's a very, very good approach. There's also the whole piece of customer service, right? So you can You can analyze, for example, how many questions come in either on the profiles themselves or via private message. And then you can measure it, you can see how fast are you responding and so on. So this will help to, say, optimize these KPIs and also with this then customer happiness going forward. And then one piece that I also see a lot, I would say like at 95% of the cases customers we talk to, you usually have the setup that at the end of the month, all the data is downloaded to like Excel or Google Sheets, and then there's a lot of number crunching, and then it's copied into PowerPoint, right? So there's a lot of work, of manual work and hours every month, every week going into this report creations, right? And that's also something, of course, where the goal is with social analytics to automate a lot of these processes, right? So ideally, you can free up your time in a way that you can focus, let's say, on the more valuable things like drafting strategy, creating content, like the things that really make a difference in the end, and not, let's say, spend your time on tedious processes of copy pasting data from left to right. And also, of course, this brings a lot of room for errors from copying, right? Where automating this could be a very important step there. Then there's a whole area, of course, which came up over the last years with Instagram and TikTok and so on, is a whole idea of user-generated content, working with influencers and so on. That's also an area where analytics can help, right? Because you can not only track your own channels, but you can also track, for example, profiles from influencers to see how well, let's say you do a campaign with someone, you can measure the success of the post, you can compare it maybe to other campaigns the same influencer is doing with other companies, right? So there's a lot of room also to analyze this and find the right influencer, see how it's going. And in some cases, influencers also give private access to data to our customers in case they have a partnership, right, which gives you even more data in this case. So there's also a lot of opportunity to broaden your analytics and reporting approach, not only to your own channels, but also maybe to the influencers and users you're working with on specific campaigns. Then let's get to these points were basically now some use cases where analytics makes sense, basically. And now I want to go into some of the best practices, right? The first one, and this touches a little bit to the talk there, what Sarah was mentioning before, called it be transparent, consistent, and actionable, right? So one point is the consistency. When you send out reports, let's say to different stakeholders, you want to make sure you have a consistency, right? Not send it out in 1 week, then 2 weeks break, another week, or if you say, I want to do it once a month, do it once a month, but be consistent so that the recipients of the reports can basically align their expectations to it, right? So basically do what you say, right? Be consistent, because we see a lot of approaches from customers. They start reporting and they do something, and then over time, no one's looking at it, and then it starts, they stop it, and then it becomes back and forth, and they do it only manually. So it takes a lot of the value out of the thing if the consistency is gone. And I think the same, what is true on social media, that you also need consistency to post, and in the long run, you will see the results, right? The same is true for reporting as well. And then the second point here, I actually called it communicate openly about errors. What we see a lot is, for example, that the wrong data comes into a report for whatever reason, right? Could be manual error, could be there's an error in the network APIs that brought some wrong data, right? And then it's tried, or people try to hide mistakes, right? If it's, let's say you are reporting to the management team, something goes wrong, and you will try to hide mistakes, right? That's what, from our perspective, and also what the culture is at Quintly, we always believe this is wrong. Also, when we figure out there's something wrong in our algorithms, for example, or there was a mistake that affected customers, we tell them proactively and transparently, right? Because this is kind of, when data is involved, it's a lot about trust. So if you doubt the quality of the data and where it's coming from, you don't trust it anymore, right? So any report you're getting in the future, you will always question, oh, is this really true? Or is there a mistake again? So the only solution to this is really be transparent. Something goes wrong, say something went wrong, and usually it's not that bad. We have seen extreme scenarios of this, where customers came and they have been reporting certain numbers in a certain way that did not make sense if you look at it in detail. But if they would correct their mistake, it would mean, for example, their reach numbers would be only 1/5 of what they were before, I mean, potentially before. And then they wanted to replicate the old reporting, where we said, okay, but this doesn't make any sense. We need to clean this up and be real about the numbers, right? So that's an example. And then of course drive action from the data, right? But I think it's be more human, although like data stuff is sometimes boring and maybe it's not your most favorite task in the day. I think even there we can say, okay, everyone makes mistakes. This can happen. Choose the metrics to align with your social media strategy and goals. What we see a lot now is we do a certain goal tracking, right? So if you have certain goals in your social media strategy, we basically give ways to how you can track how far you are along towards these goals, right? Really choose the metrics that tie with your strategy. I think it's kind of wrong to just go with any standard metrics because everyone's using it. If your strategy is more focused on brand awareness, engagement, then there are certain metrics. If you are focused more on driving conversions, there's other metrics, right? So I think that's very, very important to stay very close to your strategy when choosing metrics. Serve the right data to the right audience. Usually there's different audiences you report to, right? It could be yourself, like you're just doing some analysis for yourself to improve stuff. But a lot of cases you are sending, let's say you're sending reports to the management, you're sending reports to different teams, you're sending reports to the people actually posting the content and so on, right? So you may have different teams in your organization and you really need to make sure every report is, let's say, customized for the target audience, right? So it doesn't make sense to have one report that has everything. And then a lot of people will be confused when they look at the data, right? So it's a lot about storytelling, making it simple, keeping it focused on the most important things for that specific audience, right? So don't confuse with too much information. Try to keep it simple. That's basically the way how it has to be done or what's ideal. Feedback. Usually, I mean, in a lot of cases, reports are seen in a way, I set it up and then it's done. And then I just send it out every week, every month. And there's not, in many cases, I've seen there's not a back channel of feedback. Let's say, okay, what actually happens with the report once you send it out or the analytics data to someone, right? What is the forget? So I think there should be regular feedback. So if someone receives a report, do they actually look at it? What do they like about it? Maybe there are some things they always skip, so you could take it out. Right? So there should be some kind of feedback level. And we always consider a report like a living thing, right? It's not you set it up once and then it stays fixed for 1 year. But with the feedback, it should be something that adjusts. Of course, you need certain consistency, right? You should not change everything from 1 month to the next, but slowly over time, I think it's always good to do adjustments. As I said before, algorithms change of the networks, right? So there's a lot of opportunity to make the report better over time. For example, in Quintly, we also have reports that you can share via link, and then we can see, for example, how many people are actually looking at your report. So that's quite interesting because a lot of times there's a lot of work spent into creating reports, and then let's say everyone archives it away in their email channel, no one's looking at it or very few. So I think it's very important to establish this connection between the report creator and the report recipient to make sure they really value this from both sides. This is something now, because I'm a numbers person, this is something that's close to my heart, understanding underlying data points. I don't think it's a time anymore where you in marketing teams, for example, can, let's say, delegate this out to some analysts or data people or outsource it to an agency, for example. I really feel if you are in social media, you need to know all the metrics, you need to know the specifics about it. You need to understand differences and definitions, right? What is a video play on Facebook may not be the same. What is a video play on TikTok? I mean, there are different rules from how many seconds until it's counted and so on, right? So, and I think there's really a lot of detail, but the discussions we have also around data quality with customers and so on, it always comes back to the point, yes, you need to understand what are the definitions of the data points. How do the networks define this? How does it, if you say you want to have a comparison between all the networks, you need to think about, okay, how do you compare apples to apples and not something else, right? So that's really something I believe, let's say this data savviness needs to rise even more in the marketing teams, and this cannot be pushed away to some other people. Automate recurring reporting tasks. We had it before, right? So that's an easy win in terms of timing of your personal time to invest it somewhere else. what we also now see a lot, I would say, with more than 50% of the customers we're talking to, I would say we now have something in place where social media data is not everything, right? Social media data is only one part what you usually have in your organization. You may have web analytics, sales data, e-commerce, I don't know, anything, right? That you may want to look at together, right? Because usually in many cases to prove the ROI of social media, you somehow need to show correlations to other data points from, I don't know, increasing revenue, or we work a lot also with media companies so they can match it with broadcasting data, for example, right? So they can really see if it makes an impact. So this is something that becomes more important. And of course, there are more initiatives nowadays in organizations like data warehouses and so on, where it could make sense to use social media data as an enabler also for other data buckets, right? So what we usually also see and recommend is not look purely at the social data, but also see how can you use the social data to influence decisions in other areas, because there's a lot of correlations going on between these points. And also this point of proving ROI of social, I think this ties here very well, because this may give you the chance to prove certain things, or at least to a certain degree, or maybe to give also the social media teams more credit for things happening than in other departments that you may not have seen before. And then some common traps. With reporting without a clear strategy. I repeated it now, I think 3 times, but I still see it very often, right? There's something like, hey, we need this report, let's set it up and send it out. And you ask, hey, okay, so why? What's the reasoning for this? Why is this metric? Why not a different metric? And usually you see some people, they get the task to create a report, but not really, let's say, understand the why. Like say, okay, so we should always ask the question, okay, what happens to the data in the report? What do we do with it? Do we derive actions from it? Where does it go? What does this person do with it, right? So there should be, someone tells you, here, please create this report. We should ask maybe why a couple of times to understand what is really the goal, because there's so much work spent on these type of number crunching, reporting, and so on. And in many cases, it's not perfectly tied into the strategy. Cherry picking data is also something we see regularly. You see this funny little comic here, right? This is not data analysis. Try to grab that 84. It would really look nice in our report, right? So we see this also a lot, that you see something, try to pick it, and you take it out of context, basically. So usually what we recommend is really look at data things from multiple angles, right? If you see, say, a post is performing well, maybe look at your competition. Do they also have increased engagement on that day? Was it mainly driven by ads or by organic performance? Right? So there's a lot of things you can double check data. And I think that also comes back to transparency. You don't want to, let's say, only pick the good news out of the things and put it out of perspective into a nice story. But I think to tell the real story, I think we should avoid cherry picking the data that we see, right? Because if you have, let's say, 20 metrics on a dashboard, you will always find something that looks better than the other one. But I think you can only tell the full story if you share the full truth and be transparent about it. Making reports too long. This is also something you slowly start building your report, and then you see, oh, this metric is nice. Let's also add this one and this one and this one. And then you have, I don't know, 20, 30 metrics. No one will read this when they get such a report, right? So although it's interesting, it may make more sense to combine, make metrics more dense, put more information into single ones, think a lot about visualizations, how should it look so that tells an easy story. So that's something we also see where I think to keep it short and maybe focus it on the target audience a bit more, I think will help a lot more. Then the reporting frequency is also very important, right? So how often do you report? How often do you look at your numbers? I think there's I think there's no right or wrong here. I think you need to define something that makes sense in your case and then stick to it. But as I said in the beginning, sometimes it dies down, right? Then you don't do it anymore. Or you do it too often, like maybe you are very enthusiastic about something, you report very often, and other people get spammed with it, right? So they just ignore it in the future. I think there's always this thinking, it's good to think about it at least, like what's the right frequency, which data should I send to whom at what times, and what will it mean? And then again, this is also something close to my heart. It's about data quality. bad data quality can really hurt your reputation. Also, if you send out reports and you provide data to others and then you realize, oh, there's something wrong with it, maybe it questions your whole strategy in the beginning, right? So I think it's really something, although it's not easy to measure data quality, there's certain things you can do, right? If something looks wrong, talk about it, try to find out why this number looks like this and not like you want it to be. Be prepared for questions, right? So if someone comes back to you and says, hey, what's wrong here with this number? This looks weird. Then ideally you would have catched it before, right? To have thought about it. Or this also ties well into the knowledge of all the metrics and the definitions, right? Because then maybe it's way easier to explain certain things. But yeah, sometimes also data just goes wrong and there should be processes to work with it, right? So data quality is so important because if the data is not there, you can have the nicest analyses, the best actions and the best reports and nice looking charts from it. It will not be of any help if the underlying data is not of very high quality. Yeah, and these are basically the points I wanted to touch on. So there's a lot of things you can look out for. Also, if you have questions and want to talk about your personal setup, feel just to get in touch with me. You can reach me at alex@quintly.com. I'm happy to look at some of the stuff you have been doing. There's also good examples. We are also preparing a lot more use cases nowadays from existing customers. So I'm always very curious and also always happy to give some help or some based on our experience from the last 12 years, because we have probably seen thousands, if not 10,000s of social reports over the years. Yeah, that's it, basically. So if there are any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, there are some questions in the chat. So the first one is, which platforms are you adding to Quintly in the near future? I think the person that handed in that question is especially interested in YouTube and Pinterest. So any good news on the roadmap for that?
Yeah, so YouTube, we have at the moment. So at the moment we have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and the part of Snapchat as well. Yeah, Pinterest, we had it in the past, and they changed a bit of the APIs, but there's definitely the plan on the roadmap to bring Pinterest back now with newer APIs, especially for private data. Usually we're doing like a survey once a year where we check, okay, what's the next wished network by customers, and then we go by priority. Basically, at the moment, there's also a lot of focus on deepening KPIs for TikTok because there's some APIs becoming available that we want to be one of the first to cover it. So we're always trying to push for more.
Okay, so the next question is, do you think Quintly would best suit brands or agencies? So who is your major target group?
We usually do, we have 3 target groups: brands, agencies, and media companies. I would say it's roughly 40% brands, 40% agencies, 20% media companies. I think both works, right? In the end, the agency is also doing the work for a brand, right? So the end result is not so different, although agency can work with multiple customers, of course. So we have some agency features in that regard, but in the end, it's both.
Yeah. All right. We have 2 questions that both go into a similar direction, and that is there an option for users other than just exporting the data to connect Quintly directly with other third-party BI tools via API?
Yes, you can do that. We have a Quintly API available. There's some limitations there for Twitter because they have special rules in their terms, but in general, you can connect to a lot of different platforms like Tableau, Power BI, Google Data Studio, and so on. And this is what I meant in one of the slides, that this is now picking up a lot, these data warehouse discussions, which is a good thing, I believe.
All right, then I think we're done. Thank you, Alex, for being a part of the Facelift Summit.